Hello everybody, I am finally here with the long-awaited results from the EP official poll conducted from September 26th to 30th, 2020. I received over 6,000 responses on the Google form, so thank you all so much for doing that and making your voices heard. However, as you see on your screen here, it says 984 likely voters, and you're probably wondering why that number is so low. And well, the answer to that question is that in order to have this poll represent a truly accurate sample of Americans nationwide, I had to spend a few days sifting through all of the data and compressing it down to within the margins of certain set demographics. The initial party breakdown was something around like 60% Democrats to 20% Republicans and like 20% independents as well, which certainly is not illustrative of the real party breakdown on a national level. But anyways, I've got that all done, so now we can go through all of the data question by question. And first up is of course party ID. The most accurate sample I personally believe to be for the 2020 election is 36% Democrats, 32% Republicans, and 32% independents. This would be a 1% decrease for Republicans and a 1% increase for independents when compared to 2016 exit polls, but that's simply because I believe D plus 4 is going to be closer to reality in 2020. As for voting by party, as you can see here, Democrats are showing stronger support for their nominee Joe Biden than Republicans are by 5 percentage points, which is pretty significant, especially given that the independent vote was split at 42% to both Biden and President Trump. But saying that, President Trump won independents by 4% in 2016, but having said that, President Trump won independents by 4% in 2016. So that's possibly an even more worrisome sign for him and his campaign. The next demographic to go over is gender. We have seen a lot of reports come out recently about the gender gap in polling, as Trump's numbers with women are down significantly. And this poll would suggest that as well, as he is down by 22 points with them compared to being down 13 points against the first female presidential candidate in US history in 2016. As for men, the numbers are exactly that of 2016, with Trump at 52% to Joe Biden's 41%, so no change there. Now for reference and for this sample, I kept the gender demographics the exact same as 2016 as well, with 53% female and 47% male. Then moving on to age groups, the most common of which being ages 55 to 69. This is a group Trump won by 7 to 8 points in 2016, and he is up by 6 points here, which does make some sense given his overall lesser performance than 2016. The next group, however, is 40 to 54, which is generally thought of as the swing voting age block, and it voted for Trump by 4 to 5 points in 2016. This time around though, in this poll, he is only up by 1. So both of these demographics, at least so far, show that Biden is doing better among older voters than Clinton ever did. The final age group on this list here though is 30 to 39. A good chunk of millennials fall into this grouping, and Hillary won by 12 points in 2016. Joe Biden is up by 13, so it's not much of an improvement there, but he does see a dramatic improvement among the youngest voting bloc of 18 to 29-year-olds. Hillary Clinton took this age group to no one's surprise with 55% to Trump's 36% in 2016, which is a 19-point advantage. But here in this poll, Biden leads Trump by 30 points. Now, depending on young turnout, if this holds true, it could be a huge boost for the Democrat in November, especially because he is also doing better with voters 70 and older. To be exact, he trails by 2, when Trump won voters 65 and older by 7 points in 2016. Specifically, this could be extremely significant in a state like Florida, with how tight it is there and their huge older population. Saying that though, let's move on to race. Trump, as expected, is doing better among white voters, leading Biden by 12 points. However, this is an 8-point decrease from 2016, and it mirrors the 2008 Barack Obama number. However, what Trump loses among the white vote, he gains in the Latino vote. Joe Biden does lead Trump by 27, but that's down 11 from Clinton's 38-point lead in 2016 exit polls. That is not a good sign at all for let alone this year's campaign, but for a Democratic Party that will be relying on the Latino vote in states like Arizona, Texas, and Florida for their electoral college future. Biden is overperforming Clinton by 2 points among African Americans, as should be expected, but Trump is actually overperforming with Asians and among other races. However, I wouldn't rely too heavily on demographic information like this in polling data, because for the most part they are often quite a bit off. Let's move on to area type though. Trump carried the majority suburban vote by 4 points in 2016, but Biden leads by 10 points as of right now. That is a 14-point swing that could single-handedly swing the election for the former Vice President Joe Biden. And there has been a lot of talk about the suburban female vote completely turning on the president, and the data we have seen thus far would support that. Probably the weirdest data we've seen in this entire poll so far though comes with Biden underperforming in urban areas and overperforming in rural areas. I would actually expect the complete opposite on election day. Moving on though, we have ideology. There is a little more liberal representation and a little less moderate representation in this poll, but that is only by 3 and 2% compared to 2016, so not by much. Anyways, Biden does lead by 2 points less than Clinton did among moderates in 2016, but maybe that is because more people identify as liberal now as compared to a little bit less of a polarized climate in 2016. Conservatives and liberals are voting pretty partisanly, as you would expect though, with a tad bit more conservatives breaking for Biden than liberals for Trump. Next up though is how respondents voted in 2016. I managed to whittle it down perfectly to just a 2-point margin representative of the popular vote difference between Clinton and Trump in 2016. However, both of their voters are breaking how you would expect for Biden and Trump, but what is interesting is Biden's 16-point advantage among those that did not vote in 2016 or voted for a third-party candidate. This could either be attributed to young enthusiasm or to anti-Clinton voters in 2016 that feel better about casting their vote for Biden. Either way, that is a really good sign for his campaign, and now we can move on to the opinion section of the poll, starting with the direction of the country. 64% of voters believe the country is on the wrong track, which is surprisingly only up 2 points from 2016. Personally, I would have expected it to be much higher, but either way, both categories broke as you would expect, with Trump supporters believing he's obviously taking the country in the right direction, while Biden voters think we're going down the wrong path. As for the voters' opinion of Joe Biden, we have a 47% favorable to 45% unfavorable split. While he may only be 4% more favorable than Clinton was, Biden is 10% less unfavorable, which is very important for former third-party voters that felt very strongly against Hillary Clinton, but now feel like they can actually vote for Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee. As for Trump, on the other hand, 58% of voters see him as unfavorable to 36% as favorable. Believe it or not, this is actually an improvement for him, just by 2% though. He somehow managed to win the last election with 60% unfavorability. Let that sink in. As for which candidate is better on the economy, Biden leads Trump by 2 points. This was one of the last winning issues for Trump going into this cycle, but with the economic collapse we've seen this year, even that has wavered for the incumbent. In 2016, when voters were asked who would better handle the economy, Trump led Clinton by 2 points. So that actually makes this even more interesting as a 4-point swing. As for who the public believes would better handle the coronavirus pandemic, unsurprisingly, this is Biden's winningest issue. He leads Trump by 21%. It's hard to see any reason why this wouldn't be the case though, so let's move on to foreign policy, where Biden also leads Trump, but by 10%. Now, before you say this lead for Biden is totally implausible, keep in mind that Hillary Clinton led Trump by 11% on this issue in 2016. However, she was running as the former Secretary of State. Anyways, Biden's lead here is not totally unusual at all in my opinion, although it may be more around 7 to 8 points on election day exit polls. Onwards though to most important candidate quality. This is where we get our first real taste as to why voters are voting as they are. And among the top 3 candidate qualities, Trump actually leads in 2 of them: can bring change and cares about me. Can bring change was the most popular choice in 2016, and it was the only category Trump carried, by 68 points. Interestingly though, Hillary Clinton led by 23 points for cares about me voters, but Biden is down by 14. That is a 37-point swing that can only be attributed to something you'll see later on. He does lead, however, among good judgment voters, but by only 6 points when Hillary led by 40. So yeah, the first page doesn't look all that good for the former vice president. However, this next page is where it makes sense and where he really shines. Among voters who are voting for their candidate just because he is not the other candidate, Biden is plus 41, and that really tells you something. He also leads by 34 points for right experience voters, which comes as no surprise because, Biden does have more experience, although Clinton did win that category by 83 points in 2016. Nevertheless, now we can move on to the most important policy issue. No surprise, the economy tops the list, and no surprise again, Trump leads among those voters, as the Republican basically always does for some reason. However, Joe Biden blows Donald Trump out of the water on the next 2 most popular choices: COVID-19 and healthcare. You can already see just by looking at this data the effects of our polarizing political climate. And as for the next page, law and order comes in at number 4 and climate change at number 5, possibly 2 of the most partisan issues in the entire country. And then finally, following those 2 issues, at number 6, a bipartisan issue: the Supreme Court. Voters that stated the biggest factor is the SCOTUS broke to Biden by 12 points, suggesting the new vacancy has energized Democrats more than the Republicans. Then our next and final page of issues. There's kind of a clump of issues around 2 to 5%, but race relations, abortion, and foreign policy make up the 6, 7, and 9 spot on this list. Race relations and abortion, as you would expect, are very partisan issues, but in a way, so is foreign policy, especially as Biden supporters mostly listed the pandemic, healthcare, and climate change as their fundamental priorities. Now moving on though to the questions about voting. 96% of respondents stated that they have already decided upon who they are voting for, and Biden leads by 9 points with them. But among the 4% who haven't, Trump leads by 50 points, which is actually a negative sign for him, not a positive one at all, especially in an election where 4% of voters could change everything. In our next question, 55% of voters say that they are confident in the integrity of the vote count, and that is made up of mostly Biden supporters, while the 32% saying they aren't confident are mostly Trump supporters. As for the question of whether or not voter suppression or people casting illegitimate votes is more concerning, it is actually a pretty tight 56 to 44 split. Saying that though, it is a very partisan issue, with Democrats clearly more worried about suppression and Republicans about illegitimate votes. In my opinion though, the next question is of utmost importance. How will you vote in this election? A plurality of 41% of respondents said they'd be voting in person on election day, followed by exactly 1/3 of voters saying they'd vote by mail, and then 26% saying they will be voting early, but in person. And as with most issues though, this is extremely partisan too. Republicans clearly prefer to vote on election day, while Democrats would prefer voting by mail or early in person. It is exactly this kind of data that supports the Bloomberg Group's Red Mirage theory for election night. However, we only have a few questions left, and the next one is the importance of the debates. Almost half of respondents said the debates aren't important at all, and of which 64% are Biden supporters. Only 21% of respondents said the debates were very important in their vote, and interestingly, they were 74% Trump supporters. Now, is this suggesting that Trump supporters are more skeptical about casting their votes than Biden supporters are? It could be. But next up, we have the question of whether or not the Supreme Court vacancy left by Ruth Bader Ginsburg should be filled before the inauguration in 2021. 52% of respondents said no, and 42% said yes. And once again, it is a steep partisan divide, to no surprise. But this data would suggest that filling the vacancy is a losing issue for the Republicans and Donald Trump. The penultimate question, though, is whether or not President Donald Trump should have been impeached by the House of Representatives earlier this year. 50% of respondents said yes, while 43% said no. This data would also suggest that more Trump supporters believe the SCOTUS vacancy should not be filled than believe that Trump should have been impeached as well. However, if we were to look at 2018 exit polls, only 39% of people believe Trump should be impeached. Now, granted, the reason for his impeachment was not made known until way after the midterms, but it is still some interesting data to compare. Anyways, the final question in this poll was on abortion. While no answer gained a majority, there were 13% more pro-choice respondents than pro-lifers. Both of these issues were pretty even partisan-wise, but among those that said they have no opinion on the issue, Trump won by 3%. I don't really have any supporting evidence for arguments to make here, so we'll just skip over to the final results. In this EP poll, Joe Biden leads Donald Trump by 6.5 points, with 50.2% to Donald Trump's 43.7%. And although this lead is pretty large, it is a full 3 points lower than 538's current polling average for the race. So if anything, this poll is actually favoring Trump more than the average. But anyways, thank you all so much for taking part in this poll and watching the video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please make sure to like the video down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out more content on your screen here as well, and tune in next time. EP out.